Rich Wells is here to join us with Dow Chemical. In addition to being my boss, he is the Vice President of Gulf Coast Operations for Dow, based down in Freeport. He's the site director there as well, over 5,000 employees at that site. Rich has had a long career and has had some interesting assignments along the way, quite a diverse background. After his first 15 years or so in Freeport, where he started with Dow, he moved to the Netherlands into a global supply chain director role for our hydrocarbons and energy business. After doing that for a few years, moved back to the U.S. in Midland, up where Dow headquarters is, and some various roles up there. Among those, he was the business vice president for our chlorine business for a number of years. He moved into a role as vice president for energy, climate change, and alternative feedstocks, and had a big part in shaping Dow's climate policy goals and strategy at that time frame. That was back in 2007. Rich then moved into a role as vice president of global government affairs and public policy, and did that for a number of years before he returned back into manufacturing as the site director at our Midland site and vice president of our North U.S. Operations. And then last year he moved back to Freeport after being away for quite a while, got reacclimated to the rain and the mosquito population down in Lake Jackson, and really glad to have him here and welcome him to the stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. And they say if you can't get your mom to introduce you, the next best thing is get someone who works for you to do it. So I'm delighted to be here today. What I want to do is give you a sense for Dow Chemical and about our Gulf Coast operations, and then I also want to address a little bit of what it's going to take for us to continue to be successful here on the Gulf Coast. The slide talks about us being the new Dow. A lot has happened in Dow Chemical over the last 20 years, and a lot's going to happen in the next year. But I think to understand all that, we need to take a step back. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson. Our company was founded by a gentleman by the name of Herbert Henry Dow. He was born in Canada, moved to Ohio, got his education at Case Western University, and while he was there, he came up with some different ways to make chemicals. Now, as I've studied this man, and I do so because he intrigues me, what I have discovered is that he really represents the perfect combination of knowledge of science and technology. He has an entrepreneurial spirit. He knows how to make money from those ideas, and he's a risk taker, or he was a risk taker. And the culture he established in our company, and it's really said in this quote that's on the slide, it's driven us through the 121 years that we've been around, and we continue to live by his spirit to this day. Now, he came to find his way to extract bromine out of brine. He did that while he was in college, and he wanted to monetize that. So he did a little bit of a geological survey, and he found that in the middle of Michigan, right in the middle of the state, there was prehistoric brine deposits. So he moved up there. He got a lot of investors interested because he wasn't a wealthy man. He moved up there. He found a place in a town called Midland, Michigan. As the name says, it sits right in the middle of the state. He tapped into those brine reserves, and he started making bromine with the company that was called the Midland Chemical Company. Very successful. Bromine at that time was used for dyes. It was used for pharmaceuticals. And the company was doing good. The investors were pleased. They were getting a return. But Mr. Dow, Herbert Henry, was not happy. He thought he could do more. And he started experimenting with finding other chemicals in the brine, namely chlorine. He saw an opportunity there. Well, his investors didn't like that he was spending company money to do this. Arguments pursued. He kept working on it. The experiments didn't always work. And make a long story short, he was fired from the Midland Chemical Company. He went back to Ohio. He set up a little pilot plant in Ohio. He perfected his chlorine process. He moved back to Midland, Michigan, and he established the Dow Chemical Company in 1897. Dow Chemical started making chlorine. It started making bromine. He expanded his product mix. His new investors were doing even better than the old investors. He ended up buying the Midland Chemical Company, combined the two, and as we like to say, the rest is history. This is a picture of that very first plant in Midland, Michigan, and I'm proud to say that plant still operates today. If you took an aerial photograph from that same spot today, the only real difference would be down in the lower left side, there's now a baseball stadium. Midland, Michigan happens to have a Los Angeles Dodgers Class A minor league team that plays there, and of course, they play in a stadium known as the Dow Diamond. So let's fast forward a little bit and talk about how that spirit has kept with us. Over the past 20 years, we've seen a lot of changes in our company. About at the turn of the century, we announced that we were acquiring the Union Carbide Corporation. That deal was completed in 2001, and that brought with us some new technologies to us. It brought a large Gulf Coast presence. We got 3 large sites down here in the Gulf Coast. It brought new technologies. One in particular was ethylene oxide technology. Union Carbide had the best technology in that. We were already making EO, but it was a little bit better way. But more importantly, they brought a business model to Dow that was new to us. It was really how to work with the people who had the feedstocks at that time, which was the countries mostly in the Middle East, and their national oil companies, and how we could go in and form a partnership with them. They would provide the feedstocks, we would provide the technology, and that's something that Union Carbide did a great job of setting up. We picked it up, and we've expanded it and continue to do so. Then, fast forward another about 8 years, we acquired the Roman Haas Company. Again, we had some Gulf Coast assets that came with that, expanded our presence on the Gulf Coast, particularly in this area, in the Houston Ship Channel area. We got some new technologies. The one that really interests us and really broadened us out, it was their coatings business. Made a big difference. And from a cultural perspective, they brought to us the concept of customer-based innovation. Our history has been more in, we'll invent something and we'll go out and see who wants it. Roman Haas had a concept, let's go talk to the customers, let's find out what their customers want, let's get them connected with our technologies, let's see where we have a match, let's see how we can take our technologies and match it to what the customer needs. And that's really changed our company and opened up lots of opportunities. And then most recently, back just last in 2016, we finished the purchase of Dow Corning. We already owned half of Dow Corning. It was a 73-year joint venture with Corning Glass, although it operated completely independently from Dow. We bought the half that we didn't already own, and we integrated them into Dow. What Dow Corning has brought to us is a whole new molecule, and that is chemistry built around silicone. Dow, for the most part, is a company built around carbon chemistry. Silicone chemistry is a whole other area. It's a very complementary product mix. It goes into a lot of the same markets that we're already in, and we've already seen synergies from being able to do that. And our R&D folks are having a blast trying to figure out how to make carbon chemistry and silicone chemistry come together and make molecules and products that the world doesn't even know that it needs. So we haven't been standing still. We really have continued to grow. We continue to expand. In fact, today, if you come up to a Dow employee, there's a pretty good chance that they didn't start with Dow. They started with one of these 3 companies. And then we come to 2015, and we announced the merger of all mergers. We announced that we were going to merge with the DuPont company. 2 U.S. institutions in the chemical industry were going to come together. But it's important to and we did so in September of last year, so we're celebrating our first anniversary together. But Dow and DuPont is really a means to an end. The intent is not to have this company survive on a whole nother year. We actually came together. We saw lots of ways to bring products into Heritage Dow, bring Dow products into Heritage DuPont, and help both of those 2 companies follow their strategy that they put together that were diverging. And so when this all comes to be, we're actually going to come out of the Dow DuPont merger, and we're going to be 3 separate companies. We're going to be a material science company, and that's going to be called the Dow Chemical Company. We're going to be a specialty chemicals company, and that will be known as DuPont. And then we're going to be an agroscience business, combining Dow's agroscience business with DuPont's agroscience business, which for the most part consists of Pioneer Seeds. That is a DuPont company. And that will be known as Corteva Agrosciences. This process has already started of us splitting into 3 companies. Dow will be the first company to come out. We'll come out in April of next year. Just a couple of weeks ago, we filed our Form 10 with the SEC that describes the new Dow. That's the beginning of that process. We will name our board of directors in October, and we'll continue that process such that we can be prepared to be a separate legal entity company in April. Corteva will follow in June or July, and they'll do their spin out, and then what remains behind will be DuPont. And then at that time, the company Dow DuPont will go away. So it's really a tax-efficient way for us to get assets and businesses put into the right place they need to be strategically successful as we move forward. So let's talk about the Dow part of that. The new Dow, as we're calling it, will be a $50 billion revenue company. We'll have 37,000 employees, and we'll have 114 manufacturing sites around the world. We're going to be built around 3 business units. First one being industrial intermediates and infrastructure. The second one being plastics and specialty packaging. And the final one being performance materials and coatings. And those 3 businesses are going to go after 3 individual markets. And the intent is, instead of being all things to all people, we're going to concentrate on these markets and we're going to go deep versus really trying to just stay on the surface and really get down in those markets. And those markets are packaging, their infrastructure, and their home and personal care. And that brings us to Dow and the Gulf Coast. Why are we in the Gulf Coast to begin with? Why is a company that was founded on brine in the middle of Michigan here in the Gulf Coast? Well, it all relates to the metal known as magnesium. From the brine in Michigan, Dow figured out a way to extract the magnesium out of that, and they began producing magnesium back in the 20s. It wasn't really efficient. The brine up in Michigan didn't have the magnesium they needed. They knew seawater was a better place to do that. They tried to do it in North Carolina. There were some issues there, mainly with the location. It wasn't really suited for what we wanted to do. So they put a team together, and they scoured the Gulf Coast, from New Orleans all the way to Corpus Christi. They looked for what the best spot would be to build their magnesium plant. What they came to, after all of that, is they found a place called Freeport. And I'm going to quote from the report that these guys gave to the board of directors. They said that Freeport had everything. It's got a cheap source of energy. It's got great banks of oyster shells as a source of lime, an abundant supply of salt and fresh water, salt domes, an ocean port facility, and a plentiful supply of low-priced land. And so we began. We built our magnesium plant, started up in 1941. Of course, we all know what was going on in 1941. There was a war about to start. Magnesium was a very important part of the war effort. It was used in production of airplanes, lightweight metal, very successful. And from that, we have grown to be in Freeport, actually is the second largest chemical complex in the world. It's the largest in the Western Hemisphere. But things have changed. We no longer make magnesium down there. But a lot of the reasons that I just read about haven't changed. Of course, we heard about from Dave, the speaker before, this continues to be a place of low-cost energy. Now, I'll tell you, about 20 years ago, we were really questioning that. In fact, I sat in a strategy session with our CEO when I was running our chlorine business, which is another business that heavily depends on natural gas, and he said, we will never build another major chemical complex in the Gulf Coast. It's back when natural gas was double-digit price. And as the vice president of chlorine and someone who gets judged by how much we can expand that business, I kind of took a little bit of worry about that. Then we had shale gas. Shale gas has come in. It has made a huge difference. You heard about it from Dave, and certainly Dow has taken a big part of that. But just like what we heard before, it's not just shale gas. It's the infrastructure. We have great ocean port facilities, not just in our Freeport site, but all of our Gulf Coast facilities. Both we can get out to the open ocean and serve the world. We also can get into the intercoastal waterway and serve a large part of the eastern part of the United States through that system. Great pipeline network. We can move our products from our sites in Louisiana all the way down to our site near Victoria. We can move our feedstocks, we can move our monomers, we can do what is necessary. The pipeline network in the Gulf Coast, there isn't anything like it in the world, and it's a huge advantage for us here. And we also have a critical mass of services, and that allows us to work with people like you in this room to make us more successful, to overcome some of the issues, like how to do measurements without a measuring stick here. I don't know, this picture's a little bit old. But we appreciate that, and we appreciate the services and the ability to work with you. That allows us not necessarily to have that expertise in-house when we know that we can get it. And we have taken this advantage that is the shale gas and the other things, and we've capitalized upon it. We announced back in 2010, and we like to say we were one of the first. Everybody says that, but we feel good about it. Our leadership had a lot of courage. They felt like back in 2010, shale gas was here to stay, and it was an opportunity to reinvent the chemical industry in the United States and along the Gulf Coast. So we embarked upon an $8 billion investment in the Gulf Coast that we called Gulfstream. Gulfstream was a big project. Like I said, it was $8 billion invested on our Gulf Coast operations, and it resulted in many new plants. Altogether, we built 4.6 billion pounds of new ethylene capacity, 1.7 billion pounds of new propylene capacity, 3.2 billion pounds of polyethylene capacity. All of that has come together and has added $2 billion of EBITDA profitability to the bottom line of our company. All of the plants that we have as part of Gulfstream are up and running. The large cracker that we built, the large ethylene cracker that we built, came up about a year ago and came up smoothly and is running today well above its nameplate capacity, as is our new polyethylene assets. Everything is going very, very well, and it's impacting very positively Dow's bottom line. But we're not done. We recognize that, again, shale gas is here to stay, and it's there for those people who have the courage to go take the next step. So we have taken the next step, and we call this Project Mosaic. This is an additional $5 billion of investment that we will do in the Gulf Coast from a time frame of now, 2018, through 2022. And when this is all said and done, Project Mosaic will add another 1.1 billion pounds of ethylene. The new ethylene cracker that we built in Freeport, we are already putting 2 new furnaces on it as we speak. Those 2 new furnaces will come on next year. That will be the largest ethylene plant in the world. It'll be right here on the Gulf Coast and in Freeport, Texas. We're also going to make an additional 330 million pounds of propylene and 2.2 billion pounds of additional polyethylene. So the Gulf Coast for us looks very bright, and we're very optimistic on its future, and we're putting our money where our mouth is. But I'll tell you, I do have some concerns. You heard some from Dave. I have some concerns about headwinds in the Gulf Coast, and they aren't necessarily the storms that come in here. But there's some things that are happening in the Gulf Coast that we collectively need to get a handle on, and we need to be working on, or we're going to lose that advantage. The first one is costs. Go back here. And Dave talked about it a little bit, but I want to put a little more to this. Our costs are going up. It makes sense. We're demanding a lot of the services and the products because we're building a lot here. But we're seeing issues with productivity. We're seeing issues with the quality of work. And it's gotten to the point, I was listening to an industry analyst at a Texas Chemistry Council meeting about a month ago, and he had studied this. And he said, by his own calculations, you can build an ethane cracker in China, and you can export the ethane from the Gulf Coast to China, produce the ethylene and the polyethylene, and you can do that at a 10% advantage on an NPV basis versus building that cracker here in the Gulf Coast. Now think about that. When you build it in the Gulf Coast, you make polyethylene out of it, and you put polyethylene on a boat. That's pretty easy to do. Polyethylene is an inert solid. You just pour it in the boat, and it goes. Ethane is a gas. You got to refrigerate it. You got to compress it. You've got to put it in the boat. You've got to keep it refrigerated. It's a very expensive supply chain. But yet, right now, by this one individual's analyst, and he's credible, he says it's actually cheaper to move the ethane to a cracker in China. That scares me, and that scares me a lot. And according to him, Chinese investors are shopping that project right now and are looking to do that. That cracker and subsequent derivatives needs to be built in the Gulf Coast. So we've got to get a hold of our cost. Or if we don't, we're going to lose that advantage that the shale gas gives us. Another issue is water. Chemical facilities use a lot of water. We use it for cooling. Our own site down in Freeport uses 41 billion gallons of fresh water every year. That's the equivalent of a rail car of water every 15 seconds. Now, 90% of that water we put back in the river, but we're the last person on the river. It's the Brazos. So all that water's got to go by all that development, and if it doesn't get to us, we cannot make the products that we make today. This is going to be compounded by the fact that Texas has kind of got a natural demarcation between the dry side of Texas and the wet side. It's the 100th meridian. Studies have shown that that's actually moving to the east. So a lot of the headwaters of the rivers that we take our water out of is getting into the drier zone. So there's going to be less water for us to pull from there. That's concerning, and that'll keep us from getting that next investment. Also, I'm always worried about regulations. We're all for regulations that protect society, protect people, protect our communities. We have to have that. We've proven that. But we can also have regulations that allow us to be globally competitive. It's an and statement. You can protect society, and you can do what we need to do. A lot of people see it as an or statement, and what's missing is common sense. We got to get common sense into the regulatory process, and we've got to do that so that we can continue to do the things we're doing. My biggest fear in this area is in energy. We have this energy advantage. We've all talked about it. You're going to hear about it a lot for the next 2 days. But I've seen this movie before, and I don't like how it ends. We can get regulators that come in, and they'll regulate such that the use of our energy advantage is incentivized, so demand goes up, but then they regulate out our supply, doing things like fracking bans, not allowing drilling offshore, and those sorts of things. Demand goes up, supply goes down. We all know what happened. We get $20 natural gas. We can't let that happen again, and that's something that we constantly worry about. And my biggest fear, this is the one that keeps me up at night, is the lack of skilled workers. Again, Dave talked about it. This is a societal problem. It's not a Gulf Coast problem, but it's a problem in the United States. We have a problem that we have a perception out here and out there that if you don't get a 4-year college degree, you're somewhat below anybody else. And I'm here to tell you that you don't have to have a 4-year college degree to be successful. You know, I've said, some people have heard me say this, I'm convinced if I go to New York City and I get on Park Avenue and I stop the average person on the street and I say, who adds more to society? Is it a barista at Starbucks or is it a pipe fitter at Dow Chemical? The vast majority of the people are going to say the barista. And we have a problem. We have to let people know that being a welder, being a pipe fitter, being an electrician is a very honorable profession. It's the middle class. It pays well. We need to get people into these skilled trades, or we're not going to get the people we need to operate our plants, to maintain our plants, and build our plants. So how do we manage all of these headwinds? First, with the cost one, first off, we have to be working together. The people that build the plants, the engineering firms, and the partners. We need to do a better job of getting together. Some of you, I recognize, I made a speech 2 weeks ago at an engineering conference, ECC conference, where I got into this in a lot more detail. I don't have time today to do that. But certainly we have to have cooperation. The second thing is going to be innovation, new technologies, embracing the new technologies, bringing them into the process of building plants, of maintaining plants, the digitalization of the workforce and the digitalization of our process. Things like robots, things like drones. In Dow, we recognized how much potential there is here and how little we knew about it, that we established the Digital Operations Center just down the road from here. This is a global place. We hired people who understand this technology. You don't want someone like me who grew up using a slide rule to be telling you how to use a robot and a drone. But these people have come together. They have established solutions to a lot of our problems. And really, we've got a fleet of drones like this now. We've got them in the Dow Aviation Department, and we can deploy them anywhere in the Dow world within 24 hours, and they can go to work. It's been so successful that a month ago, I have outlawed, if you will, all confined space entries in the Gulf Coast for Dow for inspection purposes. We can do those inspections without putting somebody inside a vessel, and we can do them with a machine just like you see here, or with a robot, or in the case of where they're underwater, we've got submarines that can do that. We need to embrace this technology and bring it into our plants and into our building. Water usage. Well, the first thing we need to do is apply, again, innovation here, our technology to use less water to make our processes. And we need to use our innovation to recycle. Like I mentioned, all that water that we use down in Freeport, most of it goes right back into the river and then out to the sea. If we can learn how to recycle that, and that's not just in the industrial space, but also in the residential space. A lot of water gets wasted or gets put back into those rivers. If we can grab that, then we have the water that we need, and we can be successful over the long term. And while we're talking about water, really all things, and when you get into regulations, we need to press more on the things that chemical industry brings to our society in terms of sustainability. We always are getting branded with having problems, and Dave addressed that with plastic waste. But the reality is that we are very much the solution to a lot of these problems. The light weighting that we bring to the transportation industry, the blades of a windmill, for example, that's chemistry. People need to understand that there's a net positive from the things we do. If you just look at the calculation that we had done when I was doing the climate change at Dow, if you look at how much greenhouse gas emissions that we emit as a company, and then you look how much greenhouse gas emissions we allow to be saved from our products like building insulation, just what you see on the screen here. It's a factor of 7. We are a 7x better at allowing society to reduce greenhouse gases than we emit. So if you could have an investment like that where you get a 7x payback, who wouldn't do that? That's something we need to get out there. We need to have people understand. We need to have our policymakers understand, our regulators understand that, and our politicians understand that. And when it comes to energy policy, the same sort of thing. They need to understand how precious that energy advantage is to this country and make sure that we are regulating that energy in such a way that we can continue to sustain that in an intelligent way that brings the most value to our economy. We're going to use that natural gas. We're going to burn it. We're going to make power, and that's okay. But that's a 1x multiplier. The chemical industry takes that natural gas as a feedstock, and we put a 3x multiplier on it. Again, where do you want to invest your money, in a 1x return or a 3x return? It's important for us to think about that. And then last, the big concern about skilled trades. We all have to be in this together. One, we've got to change perception. We've got to change perception out there, and that starts with the parents, and it starts with the teachers. Certainly it starts with the kids. But when a kid comes home today and says, you know what, I went to a session at school, and I think I want to go be a welder. Most parents are probably going to say, no, you don't want to be a welder. You need to go be a lawyer or an engineer. Not everybody's cut out to go to college for a variety of reasons, and we need to make sure that's understood. It's okay. We've got great programs out there where people can get associate's degrees, or they can get certificate training, and they can learn these things, and then we will hire them. This is where community colleges, I think, have really found their niche. We partner with community colleges. I've got a picture of Brazosport College down in Lake Jackson. We've partnered with them. We've put training programs in place for our own process operators. We've sponsored, along with other industry partners, a welding lab and a welding training program out there. We also work with Sanjak College here. In fact, everywhere we have a major operation in the United States, we've learned to go work with the community college put training programs in place that trains the people that we need going forward. But we need to expand that. We don't need to be the only owners of that, and we need to work with everybody in this room, and I know lots of you are involved in making this happen. This is our future. If we can have all the technology in the world, we can have all the water in the world, we can have all the regulations line up in our favor. But if we don't have people who can come in and operate our plants, maintain our plants, and build those plants, it's all going to be for naught. So, the Dow Chemical Company, a lot's changing, a lot's staying the same. It's why I've stayed with the company for 37 years. It's grounded in some very fundamental things. Work hard, take risks, challenge the status quo. What works for you today is not going to work for you tomorrow. It's just such an exciting place. And our future is bright. We've got a good strategy. We've got good leadership. We're headed to a very, very successful place. And the Gulf Coast is going to be the place where most of that happens. So I couldn't be more excited about what the next 5 years and 10 years has for us. I probably won't be around for those 10 years, but certainly the 5. And I appreciate your attention today. Thank you.